I adore the Silent Hill series. The first 4 games are some of my all-time favorites, and I actually consider Silent Hill 2 to be the greatest story ever put in a video game. Unfortunately, as has been discussed to death already, the games after Team Silent's dissolution are a complete mess. Mobile games and arcade games aside, I've always hated Origin for being extremely uninspired, and I despise Homecoming and everything it stands for. Though I have to admit, Shattered Memories is pretty good. I even prefer it over Free, and I think Downpour has a lot of great ideas but is held back by the worst execution imaginable. But do not get me started on Book of Memories. After that, we got PT, and its immediate cancellation. And with that, the series was pretty much done for. I distinctly remember back in 2022 when the Silent Hill transmission happened. I was hanging out with some friends at the time, so on one hand I would be having a good time with the boys and drinking, and on the other I would have the stream on my phone and decide. Everyone was talking about a potential Silent Hill 2 remake at the time, and it was slated to be made by Bloober Team. And when it and everything else got announced, including the movie, I felt nothing but immense disappointment. Mind you, I was a bit tipsy at the time, so I'm sure that I vented out my frustrations to my friends, who definitely didn't care that I was upset at a remake that ended up not even being as bad as I thought it would be. But then we got one brief final teaser for a game called Silent Hill F. Its focus on the flower imagery, its grotesque final shot, and the glimpses of an Eastern aesthetic were unlike anything the series had ever done before, making me think that it was going to be closer to Project Zero or Siren than Silent Hill. But then they dropped the written by Ryokishi07, and right then and there I lost my shit. See, I had just recently gotten done reading his prior works, Higurashi and Umineko When They Cry. Mind you, I did come out quite disliking Higurashi because I think the second half is genuinely abysmal, and while I do think that Umineko's own second half has a noticeable drop in quality from the first, it still remains an excellently written mystery, character dissection, and psychological horror story that left me in awe. I still consider it an incredible narrative despite its many flaws, so I was sure that at the very least this game's story would do it for me. The gameplay meanwhile left me worried. See, the devs Neobards hadn't really done anything at all pretty much before. Sure, they did some pretty bad ports, and the terrible Resident Evil Reavers, so for years I was mentally preparing for a terribly playing game with a great story. And God knows, I really didn't want another Rule of Rose. Despite that, it was the only big budget game at the time that I've ever looked forward to this extent. Naturally, I was on it from the moment it came out, and somehow got it working on my 1050 Ti, so please excuse the poor video quality and constant frame drops. But the question remains, were my worries justified? Was my excitement even met? Well, there's only one way to find out, I guess. Considering Silent Hill's greatest claim to fame is to its story, and this game's biggest draw is its offer, I think it's only apt that we start by introducing the setting and characters. F takes place in the 1960s and takes place in a rural Japanese town by the name of Ebisugaoka. We open with a scene of our protagonist Hinako Shimizu being abused by her father, prompting her to leave her house and make her way to meet up with friends. And already this game does something that I love. Similarly to Silent Hill 3, we open on a tranquil version of the world, but whereas that game shows us a city in broad daylight before it gets overrun by the fog, Ebisugaoka feels cold and distant. You barely hear any noise coming from any of the houses. Eventually, Hinako meets up with her friends, Shu, Rinko, and Sakuko. Despite their friendship, however, this entire scene feels uncanny. The game pulls off one of my favorite parts of Silent Hill 2 phenomenally. I'm sure this technique has a name, but I've taken a liking to calling it the Solaris effect, since Andrei Tarkovsky's adaptation of the novel does the same thing. Despite holding conversations, the characters all talk past each other, and any and all eye contact is brief at best. But the moment Hinako's eyes properly meet Sakuko's, the fog and a monster appear, while red spider lilies follow in its steps. Immediately after, Sakuko's body becomes covered in pores, with red tendrils coming out of them, killing her instantly. From here the game actually gets going, but I'll avoid discussing the plot more outside of the spoiler section. Instead, let's talk about something I've seen a lot of people complain about: the game not being set in Silent Hill. I mean, sure, the game is called Silent Hill, but since when does this mean that the game has to take place there? Even in the original Team Silent games, that was never the point. Most of Silent Hill 3 takes place outside of the town, and it's debatable whether you ever even really go there in 4 at all. It was never about the town. It's always been about the people in it and what it tells us about them. 2 clearly shows us that the town is different for everyone who visits it, and I think that insisting that the games take place exclusively there is reductive and kills the potential of the series. To take another Konami franchise as an example, Castlevania is also named after its central location, and sure, several games take place exclusively in it, but it was never about the castle, but the influence it had on the world around it. I really think it would be better to just be open-minded about this and let Silent Hill do the same. I've also seen a lot of people complain that this is just Ryokishi reusing his setting from Higurashi, but that's not really true either, is it? Hinamizawa is, for all intents and purposes, a mostly regular town. The horror comes from the narrative's perspective and their ever-growing paranoia. But there are several people living their lives as usual there. Here, meanwhile, we have a small cast of characters that tries to stick together. The town itself is deserted, with the only entities beside the characters being the monsters. If you want to compare it to Higurashi that badly, all it's doing is taking a similar setup and flipping it on its head, and I actually quite like that. Visually, this game is gorgeous. Even with my system making it look as bad as possible, the art design manages to pierce through wonderfully. I think that the series has always looked great, with some phenomenal environmental design, and F is no exception. If anything, I'd say this is my favorite looking Silent Hill game to date. Every part of the town is visually distinct and memorable. Despite the game being pretty linear, it manages to recapture the open feeling of the first two games, actually giving off the illusion that you're exploring a proper town with roads blocked off, rather than just a series of stages like 3 and 4. I especially love how the gradual corruption of the town is represented by the ever-growing presence of the red spider lilies. It gives this entire game an incredibly unique look, and the flowers make for an amazing alternative to the usual overworld corruption. The enemies themselves are also excellent. A lot of them carry some sort of doll-like motif, and their movements often feel robotic in a perfectly uncanny way. These are hands down the best monster designs the series has had since 4, and I love them. Though, getting back to the overworld thing from earlier, this does lead me to a big complaint I have regarding the game's visuals. Just like in the other games, you frequently swap between the foggy town and the overworld. In the older games, it was represented by the town being overtaken by metal and rust, or in Shattered Memories' case, freezing over. In F's case, however, Hinako gets transported to another place entirely, the Shrine World as I'll call it. The map does sometimes line up with the Fog World, but it's pretty much its own thing entirely. Unfortunately, my praises for the environmental design do not carry over. While the Shrine World can look very pretty, it's significantly more samey than the town. And since we're talking about the surface level elements of the game already, let's discuss another thing that I'm pretty mixed on: the music. Now don't get me wrong, what's there is fantastic. Most of the soundtrack was, as is series tradition, composed by Akira Yamaoka. It makes me incredibly happy to say that he hasn't lost his touch either, once again composing music that is tonally distinct from every other game in the series, yet fully in line with it at the same time. I especially love how he mixes his instrumentation from the first 4 games into more traditional Japanese folk music. The rest of the soundtrack, however, was made by a variety of guest artists, including 2 Umineko composers, whose songs are easily my favorites. The problem is that there are only 15 tracks in general, 5 of which play only during the credits. While I appreciate the game doing the Silent Hill 2 thing of giving each ending its own song, it ends up making the actual soundtrack in-game feel a bit lacking. For comparison, Silent Hill 2 had 30 songs total, but in exchange the game makes up for it with some phenomenal sound design across the board. The sounds of the enemies and the world around you are genuinely phenomenal, and they really helped in keeping me on edge. Or, well, it would if not for something we'll get to in the gameplay section. Unfortunately, the game does sometimes also fall into the Silent Hill 4 pitfall of using out-of-place stock sounds. I can't show the scene here, but the game straight up uses Divine Boom at one point. Now that we've gone over the undeniably great parts, let's discuss what is hands down the most contentious part of this game, the actual gameplay. Truth be told, I'm still kind of going back and forth whether I like it or not. When I first started the game and saw that they kept the separate puzzle and combat difficulties, that made me really happy. But man, this game just has me really torn on both. Let's start with the puzzles. I won't pretend to ever have been good at them, but I've always appreciated how creative and challenging they were. They'd often require out-of-the-box thinking, and there was a healthy mix of trying to figure out riddles and item utility. F's puzzles meanwhile felt pretty forgettable in comparison. For one, there were only a handful that you could even consider puzzles, and all of the ones where you have to figure out an item's use in the environment are completely gone, as you just use them automatically now. The riddles, meanwhile, are really simple compared to the earlier games in the series. Even on the highest difficulty, they'd at most have me stumped for like a minute or two. It's a shame too, because I do think that the puzzles are conceptually great. I especially like the first real one you'll run into, where you have to deduce the right scarecrow to interact with from a group of them. It's just that pretty much all of them rely on a single, very obvious hint to solve them all. It sometimes felt like they were included out of necessity more than anything, and I thought that was a bit of a shame. Combat, on the other hand, well, okay, so you know how in Silent Hill 4 most of the combat is just charging up your melee attack in order to use its animations and invincibility frames to dodge all damage? This game's combat loop feels very similar to that, though it doesn't function entirely the same. I'd actually say that combat-wise, this game feels like Silent Hill 4 2 in a lot of ways, with a little bit of downpour sprinkled in for flavor. By default, the game is set to use the Dark Souls setup of having your attack buttons be the shoulder buttons and triggers. I fucking hate that. I recommend turning it off immediately. At first, the game starts without any way of defending yourself, forcing you to outmaneuver the enemies in tight spaces. It's really tense, and then you get your hand on a weapon, and all of that changes. Since this game is set in a time and place where you would sooner find a lump of gold on the ground than a gun, you only get to use melee weapons, which can be anything you find lying around, mostly metal pipes. The game always expects you to have one on you, and so even when you don't have one, in-game cutscenes will still use its sound effects, which is pretty funny. Use a weapon too much and it breaks like in Downpour, leaving you completely defenseless. You've got a fast light attack, a heavy attack, and a charged attack. The charge doesn't protect you from damage like in 4, but it does a shit ton of damage, and you can charge it while running, so you probably won't get hit while doing it anyway. Running and dodging both take away from your stamina, but dodge right before an attack lands and you'll restore it instantly. That's right, Silent Hill is officially roll slop now. Charging your attack meanwhile puts you into focus and drains your sanity instead. If an enemy attacks you during focus, you'll get a super obvious audiovisual cue letting you counter for even more damage than a charge attack, which will usually result in them getting stunned on top of that, letting you kill them before they can even retaliate. That's right, Silent Hill is now parry slow. At first I really didn't like this combat, but it kind of grew on me, especially because the game narratively goes somewhere with it. It helps that a lot of the enemies are pretty fun to fight as well. Their erratic movements and mechanical behaviors really work for this kind of system. My favorites have got to be the scarecrows. They're harmless until you get too close, which is when they start attacking. However, they function like weeping angels, wherein they keep getting closer to you every time you're not looking. And once the game starts putting a lot of them in one area, it can get really tense. Or it would. See, once you get the ins and outs of the combats, even on hard mode, it gets damn easy. After a certain point, I had more restorative items than I knew what to do with. It felt like I was hunting the enemies more than they were me. Again, I'd be a lot harsher on this, but the game actually goes somewhere with it, so I don't mind it too much. And I did have some fun with it. Most of the time, that is. See, this game has a really bad tendency to force you into combat encounters. And I don't mean the bosses, I actually find those quite fun. I mean just combat rooms full of several regular enemies, and they get really stale really quickly, especially towards the end of the game when they start putting several of them back to back. Ultimately, I did enjoy the combat more often than not, but it's gonna be very divisive, and something you should definitely be aware of before playing it. But with everything else out of the way, I'd like to discuss the part of the game that made this without a doubt my game of the year, and one of my favorite Silent Hill games ever. Spoilers for the entire story, including all 5 endings ahead, so I suggest skipping to the timestamp on screen if you haven't played it yet to get my closing thoughts. I feel like the main question a lot of people will have even before playing the game is, what does the F stand for? The game never gives an explicit answer, and that's less because there isn't one, but more because it stands for multiple at once. Face and flower are the 2 most obvious ones, but others I could just as easily believe are family, friends, and fox, to name a few. And that's just when thinking about it in an English context. In Japanese, both the kanji for husband and married woman are pronounced the same, making a phonetic fu sound. Consequently, the term for a married couple is a combination of both, pronounced fufu. All of these would make sense regarding the game's themes, and so it's clear that the game's vague naming was intentional. The F can stand for a variety of aspects, some connected, others separate. And man, I've gotta say that the voice actors all did a phenomenal job. I'm specifically talking about the Japanese ones, mind you. Almost none of the main cast had ever actually worked on a video game before, especially not as a voice actor, each of them coming from a background in film and television. And it shows as each of them did a phenomenal job. The intricacies of facial expressions, the small details and fluctuations, and all of the emotional scenes are incredible. This is a level of quality you rarely ever see in a game, because these aren't just people who can pitch their voice up and down, but ones who embody the entire character they play. And it really adds a sense of credibility to every performance. And oh my god, some of the performances are phenomenal. Konatsu Kato, who plays Hinako especially, is incredible, bringing so many layers and nuances to the character with a performance. I don't know what it is about Ryokishi, but for some reason every voice actor he works with brings their A-game at all times. I still frequently think about some of the absolutely beautiful performances in Umineko. The English dub, meanwhile, well, it's not bad, I guess. I generally always prefer to go through things in either the language of its setting, or if that one's bad, in its native language. In this game's case it was the same for both, so that kinda made my choice easier. But even this game's kind of a special case about it. Because of its actors, I view Silent Hill F kind of like watching a foreign live-action film. Because the actors themselves are the ones who clearly portray the characters. I often find it that dubs in other languages fail to carry the same impact. And with a performance as good as that one from the original actors, it makes the English dub look way worse than it actually is. I won't bore you with any of the obvious parts of the story. Instead, I'd like to focus on trying to actually make sense of it in a grander context and theorizing the meaning of certain elements. All of this will be theory crafting, but hey, it's fun to play detective. And to do that, I'd like to take a note out of Ryokishi's prior work and offer 2 readings of the story. One involving the supernatural and one denying it. But before we do that, let's first view how the story actually plays out leading up to that. At some point in her life, Hinako reconnected with Kotoyuki, and the two ended up engaged to each other. For the sake of clarification from here on, I will be referring to the 2 versions of Hinako we see differently. Fog World Hinako is just Hinako, and Shrine World Hinako is Shimizu. The game itself makes this distinction, and it's made even stronger through the difference in their notes throughout the game. I think that the order in which Shimizu kills her friends in the Shrine World is representative of her cutting them out of her life after her engagement. In both worlds, Sakuko is the first to go, while in the Fog World, Rinko and Shu stay along for the ride much longer. I think they tracked her down in order to confront her about Shu's feelings, Rinko snapping at her for playing with his feelings, while he himself would keep supplying her the drugs in the hopes that their hallucinogenic effect would cause her to realize she has feelings for him too. Sometime during this, Ebisugaoka also becomes uninhabitable due to the toxic fumes emitted by volcanic activity. It has quite literally become a home she can never return to, hence its complete stillness in the final ending. The endings then diverge either on the day before before or of her wedding. So first I'd like to get into the non-magic interpretation. In ending 1, Hinako beats Shimizu, and in the real world completely disassociates from reality due to her overdose of Shu's pills paired with the immense stress and a resurging of the marriage-related trauma that she has due to her parents' relationship. Junko hereby is a fictional sister she made up as a figure representing the ideal woman she should strive to be like, who will protect her from her parents' abuse, and who might as well be dead after she got married. She starts seeing all of the wedding guests as monsters and starts going on a killing spree, likely seeing them as the same monsters you fight in the game. In the second ending, Shimizu beats Hinako and confronts Shu on his intentions, before ultimately deciding to go through with the marriage to Kotoyuki. The third ending has her forcefully abandoning her wedding in order to be with Shu, though never seeing him as anyone romantic, more so just trying to forcefully go back to how things used to be. And then in the final main ending, she calls off the wedding peacefully with Kotoyuki, deciding that she isn't ready to commit just yet, and him doing the same, despite his family being violently against it. The two then decide to reconnect in Ibisugaoka, where they first met, once both of them are finally ready. And then the UFO ending is just— God damn it, Mira, not again! So, what do the two Hinakos represent? Hinako is the part of her that is perpetually stuck in the state of her young adulthood, too scared to either commit or move on, and viewing marriage as a complete loss of her identity. Shimizu, meanwhile, is the now 20-something-year-old woman, and has decided to give up on her life for the sake of marriage, undergoing several rituals to become Kotoyuki's ideal woman. This is the part of her that wants to love and connect with someone who sees her as both herself and a woman, something she thinks Shu was never able to do, being ready to give up on her freedom for it. Meanwhile, we see Hinako as this manic remnant of her psyche fearing for her freedom. When she and Kotoyuki decide to call off the wedding peacefully in the final ending, I see it as both of them accepting that both of these sides of Hinako are who she is as a person, and her marrying wouldn't be right until she manages to understand both of them fully, as the endings in which one snuffs out the other don't end well. The only scene in which this categorization doesn't work is during the part inside of Hinako's home where the two confront each other. I believe that during the entire house section, the game never takes place in the fog world at all. It's the only time where we see Hinako confront Shrine World monsters and fight a boss. The only visible difference between the two Hinakos are the marks of sacrifice that Shimizu has, but in this scene, both are the same, and from their behavior I think that during the entire house section, the roles are reversed, just as Hinako says, aware of her own mania. The magic interpretation, on the other hand, ties into the older games, in particular Silent Hill 1 and 3, so spoiler warning for those. I believe that the religion-worshipping Inari and the Order are one and the same. When the ancestral Kitsune and Kotoyuki, as well as some notes, speak of intentionally marrying a special woman to the family, they do so with the intent of trying to birth the next generation of Inari, so they need a woman capable of doing so. There's a book in Silent Hill 3 that explains that, through immigration, the religion of the Order adapted an already present culture through their pre-existing Christian belief into what it is now. The Inari seal is extremely similar to the one used by the Order, and by far the closest connection is the drugs. The description of crushing up seeds whose powder contains hallucinogenic effects matches one-to-one with the local herbs of Ibisugaoka and the white Claudius found in Silent Hill, which are what the Order used to produce their drugs. From this, I believe that the area Silent Hill was built on originally started as a settlement by Japanese immigrants from Ibisugaoka, perhaps after the town became uninhabitable, who still clung to their religion of Inari. Said religion then mixed with the local Christianity, resulting in the Order as we know it. But this isn't to mean that the god and Inari are the same being. Rather, the god was created as an entirely new being through a perverse fusion of the two cultures. Whatever might be the case, one thing is clear, there's definitely a connection between the two. In this reading, the words of Kotoyuki would be taken as literal, and he was essentially groomed into falling in love with Hinako, as the cult needed to propagate the resurrection of Inari. I actually am quite fond of both of these readings, and I don't think that they necessarily deny, but rather complement each other. But ultimately, all of this is just pure speculation, and that is the beauty of these kinds of games, because discussing all of these different theories with friends was some of the most fun I've had in a very long time. In conclusion, Silent Hill F is a game that will without a doubt be extremely divisive in most every way, but for me, it was everything I could have ever wanted from it, if not more. This is a game that, despite its setting and despite its gameplay, fully understands what Silent Hill is all about. People, their fears, their struggles, and how the town manifests them. It's a return to form in the truest sense of the word, and I couldn't be happier. I'd especially love to see this team make more original Silent Hill games with Ryokishi as the writer. I want to see him write a story in the traditional Silent Hill setting. I want to see this gameplay type refined with more intricate puzzles. I want to hear Dai and Zaki make more music for the series, and most importantly, I want Silent Hill to continue being there, because this game is proof that you can bring an old series back and do it justice after all, and that gives me hope for other such series. Silent Hill F has easily become my second favorite game in the series, tied with 4, and considering that the #1 spot belongs to Silent Hill 2, that is anything but an easy feat, and I can't wait to see what Neobards does next. With all of that said, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a like, hype, and subscription. I also have a Ko-fi you can donate to help me make more videos. With that said, I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. I'm going to go make sure that my friends aren't secretly evil. Cheers.
babe, you said 9 o'clock, baby. It's 9 o'clock. You said we gonna have phone sex. Can't lie now. You said 9 o'clock. What's up? Then we gonna do it or what? It's 9 o'clock. Man, I'm going to block you, man. You lied to me, cuz. You was not real, cuz. You fake, cuz. See, that's how I know you fake now. I'm about to block you, cuz, for real, man. Don't hit me up, cuz you gonna be blocked, man.